Act 1. The King of the Teamsters. In the landscape of 20th century America, few figures cast a longer or more controversial shadow than James Riddle Hoffa. He was not a president, a movie star, or a general, but for a time, he was arguably one of the most powerful men in the country. Jimmy Hoffa was the iron-fisted, charismatic, and deeply polarizing president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, America's largest and most powerful labor union. To his supporters, the hard-working truck drivers and warehouse workers of the nation, he was a hero, a champion of the working class who fought tirelessly to win them better wages, benefits, and a sense of dignity. To his enemies, including the highest levels of the U.S. government, he was a ruthless mob associate, a man who had allowed the cancer of organized crime to infiltrate and corrupt the very union he was sworn to protect. He was a man of the people and a man of the mob. It was his dangerous duality. This life lived in the gray area between the saint and the sinner that would ultimately lead to his spectacular rise, his dramatic fall, and his final, baffling disappearance into the mists of American folklore. Jimmy Hoffa was born into poverty in rural Indiana in 1913. He was a born fighter, a natural leader with a fiery temper and an unshakable will. He rose through the ranks of the Teamsters Union in Detroit during the violent labor struggles of the 1930s. He was tough, smart, and utterly fearless. He understood power, and he knew how to use it. By 1957, he had clawed his way to the very top, becoming the international president of the Teamsters. Under his leadership, the union became a true powerhouse. He negotiated the first national freight hauling agreement, a landmark achievement that brought prosperity to hundreds of thousands of American families. He was a master negotiator, a man who could sit down with the heads of the biggest corporations in the country and walk away with a deal that favored his men. His members revered him. They saw him as one of their own, a man who had never forgotten where he came from. But Hoffa's rise to power came at a steep price. To consolidate his control over the union, he had forged a dark and dangerous alliance with the American Mafia, La Cosa Nostra. He allowed mobsters to use the Teamsters' massive pension fund, a multi-billion-dollar treasure chest, as their own personal bank. The fund was used to finance the construction of mob-owned casinos in Las Vegas, to fund illicit activities, and to enrich some of the most powerful crime families in the country. In return, the mob provided Hoffa with the muscle and the political influence he needed to maintain his grip on the union and crush his rivals. It was a deal with the devil, a pact that made him untouchable, but also made him a prime target for law enforcement. That target was painted squarely on his back by one of the most powerful men in Washington, Robert F. Kennedy. As chief counsel for a Senate committee in the 1950s, and later as Attorney General under his brother, President John F. Kennedy, RFK made it his personal crusade to bring down Jimmy Hoffa. The two men developed a deep, personal, and venomous hatred for each other. Kennedy saw Hoffa as the embodiment of corruption, a cancer on the American labor movement. Hoffa saw Kennedy as a privileged, arrogant Brahmin who had never done a day of hard labor in his life, and who was out to destroy the working man. Their feud became legendary, a high-stakes battle of wills played out on the national stage. Kennedy's relentless pursuit finally paid off. In 1964, Hoffa was convicted of jury tampering, bribery, and fraud. After years of appeals, he finally went to prison in 1967, sentenced to a 13-year term. The king was dethroned. From his prison cell, Hoffa tried to maintain control of his beloved union, but his power was slipping. He installed a loyal but weak successor, Frank Fitzsimmons, to keep his seat warm. But Fitzsimmons, once a Hoffa puppet, began to enjoy the taste of power. More importantly, the mob found that Fitzsimmons was far more pliable and easier to control than the notoriously stubborn Hoffa. They liked the new arrangement. They had no desire for the old king to return. But Jimmy Hoffa was not a man who gave up. He was determined to get out of prison and reclaim his throne. And that determination would set him on a collision course with the most dangerous men in America. Act 2. The Comeback and the Collision. In 1971, after serving less than 5 years of his sentence, Jimmy Hoffa was released from prison. His freedom came with a price, a presidential pardon from Richard Nixon. But the pardon had a crucial, and for Hoffa, a devastating, condition attached. He was barred from any union activities until 1980. For a man whose entire identity was tied to the Teamsters, this was a death sentence. Hoffa was convinced he had been betrayed, that Frank Fitzsimmons and his mob allies had secretly negotiated a condition with the Nixon administration to keep him out of power permanently. He was furious, and he was not a man who took betrayal lightly. Free from prison, Hoffa immediately launched a relentless, one-man campaign to get the restriction on his pardon overturned and to win back the presidency of the Teamsters. He began to travel the country, meeting with local union leaders, giving fiery speeches, and reminding the rank-and-file members of the glory days under his leadership. He was still a hero to many of them, and his comeback tour was gaining momentum. But his actions were making some very powerful people very nervous. The mob had grown comfortable with Frank Fitzsimmons. He gave them free rein to plunder the union's pension fund without any of the pushback or arguments they had often gotten from the strong-willed Hoffa. The last thing they wanted was for the unpredictable and hot-headed Hoffa to return to power. He knew too much. He knew where all the bodies were buried, both literally and figuratively. If he regained control, he could cut off their access to the pension fund, their golden goose. Even worse, in his desperation to get back on top, he might start talking to the feds, trading his knowledge of mob secrets for their help in getting his union back. Jimmy Hoffa had gone from being the mob's greatest asset to their most dangerous liability. Hoffa, however, seemed oblivious to the danger, or perhaps he was simply too arrogant to believe the mob would ever move against him. He began to openly threaten his rivals. He publicly accused Fitzsimmons of being a weak puppet and of letting the mob run wild. He made it clear that when he returned, there would be a cleaning of the house. He would draw a line in the sand, daring his enemies to cross it. In the summer of 1975, the situation reached a boiling point. Hoffa was planning to attend a meeting that he believed was set up to mediate the dispute between him and a powerful Detroit mob figure, Anthony "Tony Pro" Provenzano. Provenzano was a high-ranking captain in the Genovese crime family and a Teamsters official from New Jersey. The two men had once been close allies, but they had had a bitter falling out while in prison together. Hoffa knew that to get his union back, he needed to make peace with the mob, and he believed this meeting was the first step. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on the afternoon of July 30th, 1975, at a popular local restaurant, the Machu's Red Fox, in Bloomfield Township, a suburb of Detroit. Hoffa told his wife and a friend where he was going and who he was meeting. He drove off in his green Pontiac Granville alone. It was the last time anyone who knew him would ever see him again. Act 3. The Vanishing at the Red Fox. At 2:30 p.m., a half hour after the scheduled meeting time, Jimmy Hoffa, a man known for his punctuality, called his wife Josephine from a payphone near the restaurant. He was angry and frustrated. "Where the hell is Tony Pro?" he complained. He told her he had been stood up. She urged him to come home. He said he would wait a little longer. It was the last conversation they would ever have. What happened in the next few hours is the central, enduring mystery of the case. The FBI's investigation, based on eyewitness accounts and informant testimony, has pieced together a likely, though unproven, timeline of events. They believe that shortly after that phone call, a car pulled into the restaurant parking lot. Inside were several men Hoffa knew and trusted, including his close associate and foster son, Chucky O'Brien, and several members of the Detroit Mafia. They likely told Hoffa that the meeting had been moved to a different location and offered him a ride. Hoffa, knowing the men, would have gotten into the car without suspicion. From the restaurant, it's believed Hoffa was driven to a nearby house that was owned by a local mob associate. What happened inside that house is a matter of grim speculation. The prevailing theory is that he was killed almost immediately, likely with 2 gunshots to the back of the head. It was a classic, efficient mob execution. The king of the Teamsters was dead. Now, the conspirators face their biggest challenge: how to make a man as famous as Jimmy Hoffa disappear forever. This is where the story descends into a macabre world of mob folklore and gruesome theories. The most famous, and for many, the most believable theory is that Hoffa's body was transported to a mob-owned sanitation facility, where it was placed inside a 55-gallon steel drum, and either incinerated in a high-temperature furnace or crushed and compacted inside a car with other scrap metal. Another popular theory, immortalized in the Martin Scorsese film The Irishman, comes from the confession of a mob hitman named Frank the Irishman Sheeran. Sheeran claimed that he was the one who personally shot and killed Hoffa in the Detroit house. He said the body was then cremated at a local funeral home. Over the years, the theories have grown more and more outlandish. There is the infamous legend that Hoffa's body was buried in the concrete foundations of Giant Stadium in New Jersey. The FBI took this tip seriously enough to conduct a search of the stadium before it was demolished, but they found nothing. Other theories have placed his body at the bottom of a Florida swamp, buried under a swimming pool in a suburban Detroit home, or ground up and mixed into concrete of a highway. The day after his disappearance, when Hoffa failed to return home, his family reported him missing. The police found his car unlocked in the parking lot of the Machu's Red Fox restaurant. But of Jimmy Hoffa himself, there was no trace. The FBI immediately launched a massive investigation, one that would become one of the longest and most frustrating in its history. They knew, almost from day one, that the mob was responsible, but knowing it and proving it were 2 very different things. Act 4, the Code of Silence. The FBI's investigation into the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa ran into a blue wall of silence. The mob's code, omerta, was in full effect. No one would talk. Suspects were brought before a grand jury, but they either pleaded the Fifth Amendment, refusing to testify, or they lied. Chucky O'Brien, the man who likely drove Hoffa to his death, has always vehemently denied any involvement. Anthony Provenzano, the man Hoffa was supposed to meet, had a convenient alibi. He was in New Jersey, playing cards with his associates. The investigation was a massive, sprawling puzzle. The FBI identified a list of key suspects, a who's who of the Detroit and New Jersey Mafia. They included Tony Provenzano, Russell Buffalino, the powerful head of the Pennsylvania crime family, and Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a feared Detroit mob captain. But they could never gather enough direct evidence. A murder weapon, a body, a credible witness willing to testify in open court, to charge anyone with the murder itself. The case became a national obsession. The media was filled with stories and speculation. The FBI chased down thousands of tips, many of them from psychics, prisoners seeking deals, or attention seekers. They have dug up farms, searched under driveways, and used ground-penetrating radar on countless properties across the country. Each new search brings a flurry of media attention, a brief moment of hope that the mystery might finally be solved. But each one has ended in the same way, with nothing. Over the decades, the key players have all died, taking their secrets with them. Tony Provenzano died in prison on unrelated charges. Frank Fitzsimmons, the man who replaced Hoffa, died of cancer. The mobsters, the union officials, the witnesses, they are all gone. The case is a ghost story, popular by the ghosts of men who live and died by a violent code. In 1982, 7 years after he vanished, Jimmy Hoffa was officially declared legally dead, but his case has never been closed. It remains an open, active homicide investigation for the FBI. It is a testament to the power of organized crime and the chilling effectiveness of their code of silence. They were able to murder one of the most famous men in America in broad daylight and get away with it completely. Act 5, an American legend. So why does the story of Jimmy Hoffa continue to fascinate us nearly half a century after he disappeared? His disappearance has become more than just an unsolved crime. It is a piece of American mythology, a story that speaks of larger themes of power, corruption, and the dark underbelly of the American dream. Hoffa himself is a complex and compelling figure. He was not a simple hero or a simple villain. He was a deeply flawed man who did great things for the working class, but who also made a pact with the devil to achieve his goals. He was a modern-day tragic hero, a king who was ultimately consumed by the very forces he had used to build his kingdom. His story is a cautionary tale about the corrupting nature of absolute power. The mystery of his final resting place also holds a morbid fascination. The idea that his body could be buried under a famous football stadium or a suburban swimming pool is a powerful, cinematic image. It speaks to the idea that the dark secrets of the past are literally buried just beneath the surface of our everyday lives. The search for his body has become a modern-day quest for the Holy Grail, a search for a truth that may be impossible to find. The Hoffa case also represents the end of an era. It was the last great, high-profile mob hit of its kind. In the years that followed, the FBI's use of the RICO Act and informant testimony would systematically dismantle the power of the American Mafia, the mob that Jimmy Hoffa knew, the mob that could make a man like him disappear without a trace, no longer exists in the same way. His disappearance was, in a way, the final dramatic act of La Cosa Nostra's golden age. Today, the name Jimmy Hoffa is still a household name, but not for the labor contracts he negotiated. He is remembered for the way he left the world, as the central character in America's most famous unsolved disappearance. He is a ghost who haunts the American consciousness, a symbol of a time when unions and the mob held immense, unchecked power. His story is a reminder that even the most powerful men can be brought down, and that some secrets are so dark, they are never meant to be uncovered. The search for Jimmy Hoffa may never end, because in the end, we may not be looking for a body. We may be looking for a piece of our own dark, complicated, and fascinating history.